Deep Fat Fried, starring Scotty and Balzigo and some guy.
Who is that guy?
DFF. Yeah, it's 9 for another episode. Derf Taff Pete up in this motherfucker.
Oh shit!
You guys
Somebody just got a bingo space.
Man.
Yeah,
I'm trying to help him out.
Bingo.
What are some of the things I'm supposed to do? Let's give everybody a bingo.
Let's go look at our DFF bingo sheet because that's a good way to fill time at the beginning of the episode.
Somebody did that, dude. Somebody,
I know. I saw.
Somebody
fucking. Yeah, I'm pulling it up now. I'm pulling it up now, Paul. Pulling it up now. Pulling it up now.
Yeah, they made a bingo.
The problem is that you can't.
B-I-N-G-O.
You can't do. I mean, you'd have to create different bingo sheets.
Go.
Because I mean, you know, if it's all just this same one, you can't really play.
Well, everybody can play at home.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
TJ's drunk. Yeah, so they got one last night.
So here we go. Let's take a look. Here's the bingo sheet. So so there's I'm quitting smoking for real this time, or I'm back in ketosis. That's the first slot. TJ and Paul get into a political debate.
Right.
The host gets super analytical and look at every detail in an image. We do that sometimes, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Scotty does a Ben Shapiro imitation. Climate change. Yeah, fuck us for talking about one of the most pertinent issues of the day.
I think it's a fuck you.
Reference to slasher film or horror movie. That's mostly you, Paul. Trump tweet. Derf Taff Peed, that's the slot I just gave him. 10-minute pre-show banter. That's pretty much everyone. Oh, 10-plus minutes. I mean, I guess sometimes it's under 10 minutes. TJ's drunk. Yeah, you would have won that last night. Dick-sucking jokes. I think that's in every episode. Wojcicki, because apparently we don't pronounce that right, I guess. Political correctness. TJ and Paul gang up on Scotty for being straight.
Happens all the time, dude.
One of the hosts pretends to act like an SJW for a second.
We do a lot of that, too.
Florida Man. I don't do as much Florida Man. Because usually those Florida Man stories, there's not much more to say about them than, whoa, that's crazy. Someone says something philosophical.
Oh, man. Good luck with that one.
Stops midway through article to insert commentary.
That's a,
every episode. Every episode where we have an article, anyway. Fox News. Someone hits a vape, joint, or wax pen.
That never happens on the show.
I don't think that's ever happened.
Nope.
Patreon advertisement that is actually entertaining.
I like the next one.
Everyone makes fun of Stevie. Paul starts screaming. Paul's voice is fucked right now from all the screaming he's been doing.
I can't scream no more.
Someone, whether it's one of the hosts or a debater in a video, commits a fallacy.
So I want to give everyone an opportunity to get another space right now because, dude. So, anyways, I guess we called Stevie what? We called Stevie the other day during an episode, and then Stevie like freaked out. He sent us all a text message like, "When will this be airing?" Then he contacted Taylor and is all like, "I need to see the audio linked for that episode."
Weird.
And then he's like, "Never mind, I don't need to see it." He was all like freaking out about it. It's like, Stevie, you're fine, you know.
Jeez. Nothing even happened.
Yeah, like nothing. Like,
it wasn't even weird.
I know.
I mean, that episode's airing next Friday.
Yeah, it's airing next Friday.
Because you know, Paul's going on a little trip, so we've been recording every day this week. So we're a little bit at the end of our fucking rope, and everyone wants to kill each other and themselves.
Yeah, but the weird thing was, Stevie didn't even do anything weird. He was just like, "Ugh, I don't want to deal with you right now."
Yeah, he was just like, "Ugh, more of this shit, eh? More of this fucking
You know what?
bullshit."
I want to get Stevie on the show soon to talk about this stuff, man.
Hey, Paul, did you hear about that new Pentagon laser that can identify subjects based on their heartbeat from hundreds of meters away?
Whoa.
No.
Yeah, so the Pentagon can now identify targets from afar using a laser to measure heartbeats. It's being developed by the U.S. Special Operations for surveillance. Infrared lasers are able to penetrate clothing and skin to monitor blood flow. Heartbeats are apparently even more unique than faces or thumbprints, so you can easily be identified by your heartbeat.
That's Paul's heartbeat.
Prototypes currently have a range of about 200 meters or 219 yards.
Wonderful.
Yeah, mine sounds like, oh, God, oh, no. That's what mine sounds like.
They'd have to have your heartbeat on record to identify.
Well,
with
they get you once, and then they
got you. Forever.
Then they got you forever, right?
Bastards.
Motherfuckers.
Fucking.
I don't know, that might be TJ's. How high were your triglycerides, TJ? Like
420.
420, dude.
420.
Yeah, and
make money.
That range is dangerously high, dude.
Dangerous.
Red zone.
He takes like some fish oil shit now. It's supposed to help him.
Triglycerides. It's
You
not
just drinking fish piss now?
What?
Fish oil, dude.
You drink fish piss is what I heard.
You're a gross bastard.
You drink a
Paul.
vial of fish pee every night.
You're a gross bastard. So normal triglyceride level is supposed to be 150 milligrams per deciliter.
Mm-hmm.
Borderline high is 150 to 199. High is 200 to 499, and very high is 500 or above.
I'm 209. You're dude.
So
you're
you're high.
barren.
You're considered high too. You're in the same category as me.
No, you're 420.
I'll know mine soon. I've got an appointment. For
No, you're above 400.
Six.
You said 200 to 400.
The number of the beast. No, it says 200 to 499.
Oh, 499. Okay.
500 or
well,
over.
I'm barely
is very
in
high.
that range. You're fucking at almost the top of that range.
Whatever. You're such a queer, Scotty. Why are you so queer?
Your arteries are clogging, TJ. They're narrowing.
Artery is clogging. All right, so that's fine. Whatever, Scotty. You're a lying sack of shit. That's the only point here. So let's go ahead and talk about
Judd
the subject
Apatow.
of this episode.
Judd Apatow.
The
George Carlin.
The great Judd Apatow. No, we changed to Judd Apatow, Paul.
It's Judd Apatow, dude.
We're doing Judd Apatow.
You get the memo? We sent you a memo.
Yeah, we sent you several texts about this.
I feel like he feels.
So Judd Apatow was born August 18th. What was it? 1954.
No, he's not that old. It's 1969.
In
sorry.
Poughkeepsie, Illinois,
Yeah.
to Barbara and Walter
Apatow, obviously.
Yes.
Why are you struggling to remember their last name? They have the same last name as their
I
son.
believe he has Jewish heritage, TJ.
Yeah, he is Jewish descent, not surprising. But it was actually not raised. He's not about Judd Apatow. It's about George Carlin. No one gives a fuck about Judd Apatow.
Thank fucking God.
No one gives a fuck about fucking Judd.
Oh my God. I was so fucking salty that I was going to have to sit and listen to Judd Apatow.
We would never do an episode about Judd Apatow.
Oh, thank God.
I mean, maybe we would, but it wouldn't be what this is about to be, which is, anyway. I am here to chew bubble gum and suck George Carlin's dick, and I'm all out of bubble gum. This is going to be a real kiss-assy episode.
I mean, what can you do?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to find angles of like, well, you know, but I couldn't. He's just awesome. I love George Carlin. Much like with the Manson episode, I found the amount of shit that I know about these guys made it actually more hard to do the episode.
Right.
Because, I mean, like, we could probably do a whole episode on, you know, George Carlin's childhood and have it be a fucking 2-hour, 3-hour episode.
Right.
George Carlin in the 60s could be an episode. George Carlin in the 70s could be an episode. George Carlin in the 80s, the 90s, towards the, you know, the 2000s, towards the end of his career. They could all be their own fucking episode, honestly. But we're not going to do all that. We're not going to go through all that shit. So, how does one summarize the life and impact of George Carlin? The answer I've discovered trying to do this research is one doesn't. His career is just way too vast. His material is way too expansive. His impact is too incalculable. So what I can tell you in summary is that George Carlin was just the sort of once-in-a-lifetime genius, the likes of which you're probably just not going to see again. I don't expect to see another George Carlin in my fucking lifetime. I really don't. And I'm not saying that there's no one that has been as good as him or whatever, but I'm saying that there was a uniqueness to his perspective. That the only person I can even really think that belongs in the same sentence that worked around the same times as him would be Bill Hicks, who obviously had a much shorter career due to his early death from pancreatic cancer.
Right.
Obviously, Richard Pryor,
Well, let me ask
Bill
you this.
Cosby
So how'd you
probably belong in the same discussion.
You're the one that researched and created
Yes.
this episode. So what angle, if what you're saying is like, I can't really pick a common, thread or theme, so it's just that he's just so unique, this like a once in a fucking generation kind of person as far as field of comedy is concerned.
Yeah. Well, few artists age like wine, Scotty.
Certainly you haven't.
Yeah, certainly not. Certainly not.
Bring back 2011 TJ.
2011 TJ is never coming back.
Well, George Carlin did, in fairness. I've heard, because I've done some research on him. I talked about his career. Like, he did hit low points in his career.
Oh, yeah, he had highs and lows.
People, obviously,
it wasn't all
his
just
shtick became
up
all
and
the
up
times.
and up and up and up and
People
never
thought-
end. It's just a non-stop ride to the top.
Yeah, he wasn't a constant innovator. I mean, he had his high points and his low points.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're talking about a guy, and that's really one of the things that I want to focus on here is the fact that just the immensity of the career. Like, how many times have you heard it said of an artist or an entertainer, their early stuff was better? How many times have you said it yourself?
All the time.
All the time.
Oh, man, 9 Inch Nails, yeah. Oh, I love their early stuff.
Yeah.
Or Marilyn Manson, love his early stuff. Or, whoever. This director. We can even say about Judd Apatow. Oh, yeah, I liked some of his early films.
Sure.
There's tons of artists that they have this big boom. They hit the scene, they make their mark, and then they kind of fucking fade away like a fart.
Like the
in
80s
the
rock,
wind.
the 80s rock band that makes the same album
Yeah,
over
the
and
80s,
over again.
the 80s rock band that used to fill stadiums that now does 80s themed cruises or something.
The director that used to make art house fucking films that had mainstream appeal that's now just making basically summer blockbuster schlock for people.
Right. So with Carlin's, there's plenty of fans, myself included, that prefer his later stuff. It seemed like with each decade of his 52-year career in entertainment, he dug a little bit deeper into the essence of his being and the world around him to deliver something that was even more raw and real than he had before. So I think George Carlin is a rare example of an artist or an entertainer who aged like wine, just got better and better over time, honed his craft to new levels, brought his fucking performance up, his writing up, everything. He just got better and better at what
he
he
stayed
did.
sharp throughout his entire life. I mean, some of the stand-up he delivered even maybe a few years before he died.
The only
was
person I
top-notch.
can think of on the Carlin level who maintained that kind of level of success in his field would probably be Bill Cosby, who had a slightly longer career at 57 years. But George Carlin never raped anyone as far as we know. So he's got that going for him.
Going for him. Yeah.
And, when Bill was making family sitcoms and lecturing black people to pull up their pants, Carlin was delving into his most subversive material yet.
Also, George Carlin had more fashion sense than this.
You got that right.
I don't know. I think Cosby had his own look
I mean,
going on.
sure, but I don't know. I like George Carlin's look a little bit better. Just more stripped down.
Yeah, because he's white, huh, Scotty? Is that what it's about?
No.
It's all about whiteness.
It's Bill
for you, huh?
Cosby looks like your grandpa.
So Carlin's material really encompasses nearly every possible facet of human life, from little shit like finding a scab on your head to big stuff like there's a bit he does where there's like the entire universe is destroyed and then reborn and into a fucking multiverse of fantasy worlds for everyone's Uncle Dave.
The worship of Joe Pesci.
Yeah, Joe Pesci worship, the giant electron. So he could really take a microscope to the world, or he could pan out and look at the totality of existence. Like, you never knew what level his routine was going to come from.
I think there's also always a fascination with language with George Carlin.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously, that was his big break, the 7 things you can't say, on TV or whatever.
We're going to talk about that pretty extensively later.
Sure.
But yeah, his language, he had a love of language. His father was in advertising. His mother was kind of a wannabe aristocrat who made sure that that she really instilled a language in him. Like, he tells stories about being sat at his mother's knee and being told things like, look at this word, George. You see how this word cuts? So he was really made to see, like, the power of language, and look how this word works in this context, and look how these words go together. Like, that was really instilled in him from a young age.
You see it in his material for sure.
And and a lot of his material, even
every
is
word is
overtly an
carefully
examination of language.
placed in his material.
Yeah, So I thought we'd start off by looking at his impact on some of the other entertainers around him. So we could start with Ben Stiller, who said he had an amazing mind and his humor was brave and always challenging us to look at ourselves and question our belief systems while being incredibly entertaining. He was one of the greats. Judd Apatow, who this episode is not about, said, nobody was funnier than George Carlin. I spent half my childhood in my room listening to his records, experiencing pure joy, and he was as kind as he was funny. Chris Rock actually had probably one of the more insightful things to say, in my opinion. He said, people always compare me to Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, or Bill Cosby, I guess because of the black thing, but I always thought of my biggest influence was George Carlin. He goes on to say, George approached his comedy like a musician. Every couple of years, there'd be a new album and there'd be a new act. The reason most comedians suck is they get an act, they do the same act for the rest of their lives. That's 85% of comedians, no growth. They hang on to these jokes, and every year they become less funny. I'm talking big stars, not George Carlin. He was an artist like Bob Dylan, Prince, Salvador Dali, Jean-Michel Basquiat. I don't know who that is.
Jean-Michel Basquiat.
There you go. Our artist. I don't know who that is, by the way. He didn't sit on his laurels. He was like, I got work to do. And what an incredible body of work, man. He was bringing it to the end. No one in the history of the business has ever had that kind of edge that late in life. He was friends with the Alan Kings of the world, that generation. But his style is really more of someone of my generation, a younger, hipper guy. He was like the voice of 8 generations.
Sure. I mean, that's some high praise. I don't know if I'd say he's the voice of 8 generations, but, you know, you got to confer some respect to that opinion.
Let's take a look at Bill Maher talk about George Carlin on the Larry King show.
You know, I bet you if he was here now, what he would be saying is, why do people say nice things when you die? That's the stupidest thing to do. They can't hear you. You know, I mean, he would be the one guy who would be taking issue with us all heaping praise upon him just because I'm dead.
Was he, in a sense, a role model to you, Bill? I mean, what did he
more than
represent
anyone?
You?
More
Really?
than any, absolutely. And look, I've said this many times. When I was a kid starting out, there was not many young comedians, hip comedians. You were saying right before we went on the air, you said you're too young to remember Carlin on Ed Sullivan.
Lenny Bruce
Absolutely
had a
not.
major effect on Carlin.
I miss Lenny Bruce, and I still don't listen to him. I don't find him funny. I find him groundbreaking, and I think he paved the way for a lot of people, including myself. But George Carlin was funny, like laugh out loud, hurt your gut kind of funny. And when I was a kid looking at comedy for the first time, George Carlin, when we first saw him, was on Ed Sullivan with a skinny tie. You remember that, George Carlin? He was the clean-cut guy with clean material. Then he put out an album in 1971 called AM and FM. AM was the A side of the album. That was the old George Carlin, clean suit. FM was the new George Carlin. Long hair, T-shirt, hippie, dirty material.
There's the young Judge.
Yes. This was, to someone like me, this was the Holy Grail. This was the guy saying, I've shed that skin. I'm not the old clean guy. I'm going to take this in a different direction. This is why this man is, to me, on the top of the mountain, because he's the most fearless, and he changed where comedy went.
I have one more of these influence things. This is Louis C.K. before his disgrace.
Man, TJ, bringing up a lot of very problematic people in this episode.
I'm going to take my headphones off and protest for
Bill
this segment.
Cosby, and now Louis C.K.
So let's hear Louis C.K. talk about it, and then we can kind of have a little bit of a roundtable discussion on what the influence of George Carlin was.
I hated my act. I've been doing the same hour of comedy for 15 years, and it was shit, I promise you. And I was working places like Chinese restaurants, and I'd do a show in a Chinese restaurant where they don't even know there's a show going to happen. They're there to eat, and all of a sudden you'd go, hey, everybody, and people are like, I'm eating. I don't want to be forced to sit in this.
That's so true.
So I was doing a Chinese restaurant called the Kowloon in Boston, in Saugus, Massachusetts, and I was sitting in my car after the show just feeling like, this was all a big mistake. I'm not good enough. And I felt like my jokes were a trap. And I listened to a CD of George talking about comedy and the workshopping it and talking about it seriously. And the thing that blew me away about this fellow was that he just kept putting out specials. Every year there'd be a new George Carlin special, a new George Carlin album. They just kept coming, and each one was deeper than the next. And I just thought, how can he do that? And it made me literally cry that I could never do that. I was telling the same jokes for 15 years. So I'm listening, and they ask him, how do you do all this material? And I'm like, eh. And I hear him, and he says, well, I just decided every year I'd be working on that year's special. And I'd do the special, and then I'd just chuck out the material. And I'd start again with nothing. And I thought, that's crazy. How do you throw away? It took me 15 years to build this shitty hour. If I throw it away, I got nothing. But he gave me the courage to try, and also I was desperate. What the fuck else was I going to do? This idea that you throw everything away and you start over again. And I thought, well, okay, when you're done telling jokes about airplanes and dogs, and you throw those away, what do you got left? You can only dig deeper. Start talking about your feelings and who you are. And then you do those jokes and they're gone. You got to dig deeper. So then you start thinking about your fears and your nightmares and doing jokes about that. And then they're gone. And then you start going into just weird shit. Yeah, eventually you get to your balls. But there's a whole...
So this tribute section really, honestly, could go on and on and on, because
it's rare to find somebody that doesn't have heaps of praise.
I could show you Bill Cosby praising him, Richard Pryor praising him, tons of people just emphatic with endless fucking praise.
I mean,
for
just
the greatness
effusive
of George
praise
Carlin.
wherever you turn.
The point is, he was a fucking legendary.
Right.
There's no comic like him. He stood out from the crowd. Everyone around him he influenced. Yet, if you read his book, Last Words, you'll find out that he never really felt like he was part of the world of the comedians who eventually came to adore him. You know, when he rarely went out with all the comics, to the diner or to the bar after the show to talk shop and hang out and smoke and joke and whatever the fuck else.
Was it because he was busy fucking writing material?
No, it was actually a little bit of insecurity on his part. The reason he states in his book is that he didn't feel like he was quick-witted like the other comics. He didn't feel like he had that natural sort of ability to pull funny out of his ass. So it made him feel kind of like insecure about it. And he didn't feel fundamentally on some level that he was doing the same thing that they were doing. For whatever reason. He felt like his approach was different. The kind of person that he was different. He didn't really, he was kind of not really much of a joiner. He didn't feel like he fit in anywhere. He always kind of wanted to be on his own, walking his own path, doing his own thing.
It sounded like he was never really comfortable being part of a group. It's like he always had to have things the way he wanted them to be, and I'm sure part of the insecurity was based on, if I get into this group, is it going to change me as a person?
Right.
Like, fundamentally, am I going to have to sell myself out so I can become part of this
Well, and there's also the influence on your work. If you're hanging around other comedians all the time, their sense of humor is going to bleed into your material, and maybe he didn't want that.
Right. And, George Carlin had a very careful and scientific approach to his comedy, a lot of comedians, they're funny from the gut, I think. George Carlin was very much a thinking man's comedian. He would write a bit of material, which I'm sure had its origin there somewhere in the gut, the psyche, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And he would write up material based on it. He would go out and he'd perform it. And if it worked, he would tweak it over and over again every night, or whatever he felt like, oh, maybe this would work better here, or it drags here, or there's no laugh here, or whatever.
Right.
So it was a meticulous process of constant refinement of material, always with the end goal in his mind of, once this is all refined, then I do the HBO special, then I do the comedy album. Once I've gotten all this material that I've written refined down to a fucking science. And so he had a very scientific approach to comedy. There wasn't a lot of improvisation. There probably wasn't really any, honestly. So there wasn't improv. There wasn't, I'm going to try this new thing on stage night. If there was a new thing being tried on stage, it was because he'd written something new or decided very meticulously and painstakingly that that's what he was going to do. Like right down to every like little facial expression and delivery and nuance of tone and how long am I going to pause here and this laugh is going to last about 2.3 seconds or whatever the fuck.
So George Carlin was like more like a craftsman. Like he was very meticulous in the way he carried himself, and the way these shows were done was like he was just someone that was endlessly preparing to make sure that when he would deliver to you on stage. I remember he even did that because me and TJ saw George Carlin one time. And he flubbed like one thing, this huge line. I think he's basically describing himself like the modern man.
He was doing he was actually doing his suicide bit.
Oh, the suicide bit.
It later got used in I forget the name of the special. It was his second to last, I think. I forget the exact name of it just now, but he ended up using it there. But he'd gone through about half of the bit. And it just wasn't working for whatever reason. Like it was actually, we saw his first show of that tour.
Yeah, correct.
He was starting off in Mississippi where we saw him, so the material was all super raw compared to what eventually he performed for his
HBO
album,
special,
his HBO special. And I would say midway through the suicide bit, he just said, "This ain't working. Next thing." So we didn't even hear the whole bit.
Yeah, it's pretty like sorry about that. Just didn't go the way I wanted.
Yeah, he was just like, I need to retool that. He basically just like announced that to us and moved on. So that was interesting to kind of see that process.
Another thing that stood out to me too was some asshole was heckling him. He's like, and he looked at the guy. He's like, "Is your name on the fucking ticket? No, then shut the fuck up."
Yeah, he was real. I mean, like, a lot of comedians, they try to outwit the hecklers or something. George just basically, like, shouted him down.
He was quick and dirty with it because he wanted to get back on track.
Right.
He had a very planned...
You're distracting me from what I'm fucking trying to do here.
Right.
Shut your fucking mouth. The guy hadn't even heckled George. He'd heckled the guy that came on before George. So George came out, it's like, "I've heard about you. You shut the fuck up. Your name isn't on the ticket." Says George Carlin, not fucking nobody. Fuck you, basically.
It was just a brilliant moment. Just totally shut down the fucking... There was no engagement with the heckler. It was just like, "Look, you're going to shut your fucking mouth or you can get the fuck out of my goddamn show, bitch."
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, like, look, when you talk about Chris Rock, obviously had a shit ton of amazing specials, especially his early shit.
Oh, yeah.
I just did it. Judd Apatow made some fucking good movies. Superbad, 4-Year-Old Virgin. I don't know what else. Those two really fucking stick
Did he make
in my
Knocked
mind.
Up?
He was a huge influence on Kevin Smith as well. Yeah, I did make Knocked Up. That was a good one. Huge influence on Kevin Smith, who he didn't even pull, but that's another guy that George Carlin was huge with. And I think Kevin Smith still uses the picture of him and George Carlin as his social media stuff, just because that was that impactful of a fucking relationship. Ben Stiller, obviously earlier, and I think that there is some truth to the fucking the 8 generations quote. Maybe not exactly 8,
right?
But these older guys, these guys that are way older than me, talk about, well, in my childhood I discovered George Carlin, and it changed the course of my life forever. And I can say that.
I mean, there are definitely
even as someone who's much younger than a lot of those guys saying that.
There are definitely big comedians that had huge careers within the lifespan of George Carlin's career that were hugely influenced by him, that came to prominence and then fell from prominence as he continued to move forward.
Dennis Leary was another one. Dennis Leary talked about the first time he ever wanted to be funny for a living was hearing AM and FM, the album, one of the albums George Carlin put out in '72.
Right.
Speaking of that album, in '72, there was a piece of material on his album Class Clown, which also came out in '72. He actually put out 2 albums that year. It was called The 7 Words You Can Never Say on Television, often abridged to the 7 Dirty Words by mainstream media, but George himself never called it that. It was always called The 7 Words You Can Never Say on Television. The words are shit, piss, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. Now I'm going to play a clip of George, who's going to tell you all about how this comedy routine led to a Supreme Court case, FCC versus Pacifica Foundation, In that case, which was ruled on the wrong way, by the way,
Definitely.
helped define the extent to which the federal government could regulate speech on broadcast television. In other words, it was a case about censorship. And the reason that the FCC can control what's broadcast on the airwaves to this day is because of that ruling, terrible ruling in that case. So let's hear George talk about it a little bit.
Class Clown had the 7 dirty words, 7 words you can never say on television. I never called them dirty. LA Times started that. The third album was called Occupation Fool, and I had an extension of the 7 words you can never say called Filthy Words. And I added things. I talked about fart, and I talked about other words that were on the edge, sort of like on the Twilight Zone. I talked about those words. And that piece of material, Filthy Words, was played on the radio in New York City on a listener-supported station, similar to, well, it was WBAI in New York, similar to the big ones out here, I forget, KPFK, that kind of thing. Listener-supported. And that was played on a show called Lunch Pail. It was on in the afternoon, and the announcer specifically gave warnings, a couple of warnings, that we're going to play something from an album by George Carlin that has a language you may find objectionable or offensive. And we'll warn you when we play it. If you don't want to hear this sort of thing, tune it out at that time. So they played it, they warned, and then they played it. And there was a professional moralist in the audience, someone in his car with his son who was in his teens. This man was, I don't think he was a minister, but he was part of something I think called Morals in Media.
Wonderful.
Morals in media. The censorship squad is
And
here.
by the way, I just love, and Paul, you're the one who's pointed this out numerous times to me, that these morals in media people that used to be the conservatives, a lot of them are now today's quote-unquote fucking liberals.
Right.
With this SJW. They're just the
Well,
new
Puritans. Puritans have been around a lot longer than Democrats and Republicans have.
Yes.
So, you know, they're always here in some form, and they always will be. And George Carlin was one of the people that taught me that. I think he was the first person that I heard use the word Puritans to describe, I think it was in one of his acts in the 90s, to describe media censorship and the way that people are stupid about these words. Yeah. And it's always been with me. Because he was so right about that. He's so right about many things. But for me, I mean, that was one of the things that he really pointed out to me, was that there's just always this nattering cloud of fucking people that want to get in between what you want to say and what people can hear.
And we've dealt with it so much
and
ourselves.
The idea behind the so-called obscenity.
Right.
And that's always justification.
Right. The dirty word.
It's obscene, so
right.
you can't.
Oh, you can't hear
We're
that.
not censoring you. It's obscenities, and obscenity can be censored.
Right. Which is just horse shit. But
I mean,
anyway.
we're in the midst of dealing with that on this channel right now.
Yeah,
recently demonetized for being not advertiser friendly, most likely due to things that we say.
I think that's why so many conservatives have galvanized to Carlin, even though he was himself a super left-leaning guy.
Do we need to make the 7 words you can't say on YouTube now? Is that what we need to do?
Maybe we do. Maybe that needs to happen. I don't know.
Appointed guardian of the public's morals, who listened to the entire piece with his son. And apparently he did not feel the son was morally corrupted by this, nor did he feel he was morally corrupted. Just other people might be morally corrupted, and his job was to protect them. So he made a complaint to the FCC, the only complaint they got. Now, New York is a big market. I'm sure there were 20 million, 25 million radios, counting cars. At that time, not many of them were tuned to BAI, I grant you, but no one else objected. One complaint, they sanctioned the station. The FCC gave them a $100 fine, $100 fine, and they put a mark in your folder for when you have your license renewed, you have a bad mark against you. The station refused the sanction, refused the $100 fine, and they went to district court. And the district court was in Washington, D.C., and 2-1, the station won the case. Freedom of speech was upheld. The FCC then went to the Supreme Court with the case. And in 5 years after they played it, it was played in 1973, 5 years after they played it, the Nixon court decided 5-4 that it was indecent. They had found a new category of bad language because it wasn't obscene. It didn't meet the test for obscenity. It wasn't obscene. But it was indecent. They made that up.
Wow.
And that's now a standard.
Another
and that
bullshit
was
standard.
my contribution. I'm just very...
Yeah. Thanks, George.
Yeah.
You weren't obscene. You were indecent.
You're
The
indecent.
inventor of indecency.
I'd definitely put that on my resume.
King of indecency.
But yeah, so that was a landmark case, defined the ability of the FCC to censor things, apparently gave them a new criteria with which to censor. So that was obviously ruled on exactly the wrong way. And we'd live in a very different world if it had gone the other way. If just one of those justices had thought differently on the matter, the FCC would have no power to censor language, or at least not on the basis of they still, I guess, have the power to censor obscene language, but not the power to censor indecent language. Where those lines are, I don't fucking know.
I mean, all based on one complaint.
In the stupid...
one complaint from some moral aggrandizing shitbag somewhere. So that's the power.
Who said that? So I mean, it's interesting because then the standing, it's like then it goes to the FCC. So it's like, does the FCC have standing to sue? It's such a muddled legal fucking issue that, and I just feel like if we have freedom of speech, should there be indecent words? And the answer just seems to be no. I can't believe we live in a country where you can actually fucking, and that's why Howard Stern moved to satellite radio in the same vein, because to avoid the FCC, which cracked down on him. I mean, so many people, we've been facing this issue in this country. It seems since the time this stuff has even existed, since radio, since television, and now we're seeing it on the internet. It was like before we didn't have to deal with this shit on the internet, and now it's just all come around full circle. Now you can't say certain things on YouTube.
Yeah, and George Carlin actually was jailed for this routine at one point. He performed it. I forget which state he was in. He was at a county fair or something somewhere, and he performed it, and they said it was obscene, and they threw him in lockup overnight. And it wasn't
words.
It was not. It wasn't really. George Carlin had been to jail for comedy before. There was a night, I think in the 50s, where Lenny Bruce was on the stage, and Lenny Bruce had said some things that were deemed obscene. The police came and arrested him, and George basically said "fuck you" to the police, and they also just threw him in the fucking paddy wagon too.
Of course.
So him and Lenny Bruce, rode to the police station together. And George was very shocked to find out that, he went to some of his old neighborhoods and haunts and shit and, was hanging out at one of the bars or something. And Lenny Bruce came up as a subject of discussion. And all these people who, he thought their values would be very much in line with Lenny Bruce were all like, fuck that piece of shit. He's a scum and he said bad things about the Pope and he's a fucking motherfucker and all this. And George is like, you guys never gave a fuck about the Pope until someone fomented this outrage. So he kind of started thinking about group psychology in that regard. And Lenny Bruce, I kind of agree with Bill Maher on. I don't think he was actually funny, but he was definitely groundbreaking. And, he kind of was the first big comedy free speech warrior in this country.
Certainly should have been arresting Lenny Bruce for saying words on a stage.
Lenny Bruce was arrested a fuckload of times.
Oh, yeah.
Tons of times. And really paved the way for people like George Carlin. So you got to give props to Lenny Bruce for that shit. Actually, though, we're not very far from where George Carlin started his career, Scotty. Did you know that?
Wasn't he in the Air Force or something?
He was in the Air Force.
And Shreveport?
Yep, that's right.
Yep.
The humble... Well, actually, he was in the Air Force in Bossier City, but he worked he worked at a radio station in Shreveport.
Well, that's where that's the area Taylor's from, so she'll be happy to know that.
Yeah, so basically the only notable thing about Shreveport is George Carlin's career started there. He worked at a radio station called KJOE, or KJO is how I'd say it, when he was stationed at Barksdale Air Force Base in Bossier City.
That's where Taylor was born.
Louisiana.
So,
yeehaw.
Taylor, you have a connection to George Carlin. You were born on the same Air Force base that he worked on.
Awesome. So during his time in the Air Force, by the way, George Carlin was court-martialed 3 times until eventually the Air Force was just like...
Only 3 times?
Just 3 court-martials, Until eventually the Air Force was like, you know what? Just get the fuck out of here. And at that point, George Carlin did, in fact, get the fuck out of there. So just another example of George trying to be part of the group and it just not really... working out.
I mean, George Carlin is someone that you can just tell. I mean, from his stand-up routine, from everything I've heard about his life, like he ain't gonna be. He's not gonna go quietly. He's not just gonna go, okay, that's the rule, that's fine. If the rule seems like it's bullshit to George Carlin, he's going, this is fucking bullshit. I mean, to be court-martialed 3 times in a very short-lived Air Force career is kind of, that's insane, dude. Because if you have to understand, the military moves very slowly.
Right.
So to get to the point where you've been actually gone through the legal process 3 times is astonishing. I mean, that's to me he was a fucking thorn in the side of whoever his superiors were.
Yeah, I mean, he was in the. I don't know how brief his Air Force career was. I know it was incredibly brief. So to have 3 court-martials, and the court-martial, there was also, on top of all the court-martials, he was also punished in unofficial capacities numerous times. So just not a great fit for the Air Force. I don't know why he ever thought that he would be, but he was not. And eventually, like I said, they told him to just get lost, and he did. And he got lost to Fort Worth, Texas, where he met a dude named Jack Burns, who is the other fellow on this cover. Ignore the giant, sexy 60s women.
Ooh.
The 60s.
The bunnies.
The 60s right there. This is this guy here on the left is Jack Burns, who George Carlin met in Fort Worth, Texas. And it was actually discussions with Jack that turned Carlin into a lifelong liberal after Jack chastised him for saying on the air that we should just bomb all the Chinese in a broadcast. So Carlin was on the radio, and he was just like, yeah, we just bomb these damn chinks back into the Stone Age or whatever the fuck. And Jack basically sat George down at a diner after the show, and through the course of a single discussion laid out how conservatives fight for institutions and liberals fight for people. And George pretty much instantly clicked with those ideals and became a leftist for the remainder of his life. He's pretty much completely on board with that. And Jack and George were so simpatico. They got along so well. They worked off of each other so well that they decided to start a comedy duo. They said, fuck this rinky-dink Texas radio market. We're going to go to Hollywood and become fucking big stars. So they went to California. They got a job at a California radio station, and they started performing in clubs wherever they could, eventually taking their act on the road. This cover you're looking at here is the sole album put out by Burns and Carlin. It was a performance done, of course, at the Playboy Club. And, they actually had a pretty good record of success. You think
they banged a Playmate that night when they did the show?
Good chance that they did. Who knows? But probably, maybe.
Who do you think got the hottest Playmate?
Who
was I guess Burns, because he's leading there, is probably the bigger
probably
star.
Burns.
Burns comes first in the marquee, so yeah. Maybe Burns was tapping the hottest ass. Burns had kind of already established himself as like a mentor figure to Carlin, because like I said, it was him that changed Carlin's politics,
right,
in the early 60s. So They pretty much met with instant success and acclaim for their comedy duo. They got signed really lickety-split fast. They had a big show. They got critical acclaim. They started attracting audiences. The money was pretty good.
So they kind of lived the Hollywood dream. And they're just like, you know what? Texas ain't working out. Let's go to Hollywood, and just instantly they're just getting booked.
Yeah, pretty instantaneously. Now, it wasn't like they weren't huge. They didn't fucking...
But they were doing well.
They didn't become household names, but they met with some pretty instant, like, oh, yeah, this is working. This is clicking. They got signed, and they're doing shows, and they're doing tours, and everything's working out.
I mean, that sounds like success to me.
Right.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. But George wasn't... After 2 years, George was just like,
whatever.
I'm just going to walk away from it. He did it on amicable terms. They remained friends for the entirety of their lives. But George just didn't... I don't think he wanted to be in a duo. Now, Jack Burns went on to form a much longer-lasting comedy duo with Avery Schreiber, this mustachioed fellow here. Then throughout the 70s and 80s, Jack got work here and there. Obviously, he never became the household name that Carlin was, but he had a pretty long and successful career. So when Carlin quit Burns and Carlin, he was kind of plunged into uncertainty. He was living mostly on the road. He was a newlywed. He just married a woman, Brenda Carlin, or formerly Brenda Hasbrook. Money was tight. The couple was living out of their car. They were staying with Brenda's parents off and on, who apparently they were not too keen on George, especially at that time, because it wasn't like he was providing a house and all this stability, because he's a comedian who's constantly on the road, and he's just dragging his wife along with him, and they're living out of their car, and obviously you don't get a lot of possessions. You don't tend to accumulate a lot of the consumer goods that Americans prize so much when you're living out of your car. You have enough to travel around with in your car.
It's also a very difficult life because you don't feel like you have roots anywhere.
No, yeah, and they're in a new town every night, and George's comedy career is struggling at this point. He's still trying to learn to be a solo performer, because he'd had someone to work off of. He was used to being part of a comedic duo that had some name recognition. Now he's split off on his own. He doesn't really have a lot of material yet. He doesn't really know how to work the crowd yet, and there's some places where his material works better than others, and so on and so forth. And he's a very different comedian at this point. In fact, why don't we take a quick look? This is a few years later in 1965, when Carlin has started to get some television appearances again. And this is him doing one of his early routines, 1965, on the Merv Griffin Show. He's also at this time doing guest spots on Ed Sullivan and things of that nature. Or Ed Sullivan might have come a little later, but this is him on the Merv Griffin Show doing one of his early popular routines, the Indian Staff Sergeant.
He's got a bundle of great routines, and I love this one. Here is George Carlin. George?
I've been watching the Westerns. All of us have been watching Western movies, an endless stream of them, for our entire lives, and I've noticed something about them. When the Westerns involve
we should go
Indians,
license the Merv Griffin
and
Show,
sometimes
guys.
they don't. Sometimes it's Brian Donlevy with a black hat and a crooked
we
card.
can get over 5,000 episodes.
When they involve Indians, the big scene always seems to be when the Indians finally attack the cowboys. We've been waiting for it throughout the entire movie. You can see them standing on the hill. And that's the big scene, when they finally get to them. And you always see exactly how the cowboys prepare for this attack.
Now pull them wagons around the circle. Get them old ladies up there, loading up the weapons. Come on, now tear up them petticoats, use them for bandages. Get that water up there. Stand.
Big hassle, we never see how the Indians prepare. And it's their attack.
Them Indians. What do they do? What's their side up to, huh? That alone gets a laugh.
Yep.
So this is
in
definitely
1965.
not the George Carlin that we all know.
Indians were good fighters. Just because they started in Massachusetts and wound up defending Malibu doesn't mean they're
Fucking Indians. They sucked.
We really didn't play the game with them. As I say, now, the Indians were good fighters, and if this is so, they must have been well organized. There must have been a way to divide their manpower. It wasn't just one old chief, many moon come Choctaw, and a lot of guys running. There had to be intermediate authority, a way to divide their manpower. No army can make it without a sergeant, a tough, veteran, battle-hardened sergeant, and the Indians were no exception.
All right, all the tall guys over by the trees. Fat guys down behind the rocks. You with the beads, out of line.
So this is the George Carlin that very easily could have just done this material for years and years and watched as it got less and less funny over time.
Right.
And faded into obscurity, basically. But at this time, he's getting shows. He's getting, he's on Merv Griffin, he's on Ed Sullivan, he's on whatever the hell else people are watching at that time. But inside, he's like, this is fucking insipid.
I mean, you see glimmers of the George Carlin we'd see in later years, but this just feels like him so constrained. Like, And it's like, I could definitely see why, because I'm sure at this point he was still chasing that dream of like, I'm going to be a big success. I'm going to be a household name. People are going to, so it's like, I mean, obviously if you're doing a show like the Merv Griffin Show, that's like, that could be definitely a launching pad to a very lucrative film career or anything you want.
Well, let's go ahead and listen to George years and years later talking about what prompted his transformation and how exactly it came about.
On those Ed Sullivan shows, I began to realize, not just there, everywhere, all these shows, I didn't fit. And here's what I was missing. I was missing who I was. I began with a dream of being Danny Kaye, which is a very mainstream dream. It's very middle America. It's a people pleaser job. And I dreamed a path that was traditional. Comedian, disc jockey, comedian, actor, big success. A mainstream dream. Meanwhile, what I really was an outlaw and a rebel, because I had lived that kind of life. I got kicked out of 3 different schools. I got kicked out of the Air Force. I got kicked out of the choir. I got kicked out of the altar boys. I got kicked out of summer camp. I got kicked out of the Boy Scouts. And I quit school at 9th grade. I had great marks. I was a smart kid, but I didn't care. They weren't teaching what I want. I didn't give a shit. It's important in life if you don't give a shit. It can help you a lot. So I didn't give a shit. And I was a pot smoker when I was 13. We broke the law. We broke into cars. We broke into offices. We broke into Columbia University. We broke into stores. We did all sorts of unlawful things. And I was that kind of person. I was one who swam against the tide of what is expected and what the establishment wants from us. But I didn't know that about myself.
I saw this one YouTube video this one time. I might have even done something about it on like an Abandoned Hope or something. But there was this guy who actually played this clip.
Yeah.
And was like, so this is the great George Carlin everyone reveres, a criminal who admits he broke into things and smoked marijuana.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool, dude.
Yeah, it does.
What the fuck were you doing when you were 14?
Oh, he's a lawbreaker. He should have more respect for the rules.
Boo.
I know what my dorky ass was doing. It certainly wasn't cool shit like that.
I was not as cool.
Yeah,
that's just salt, though, because not everybody can be that.
Right.
So that's just somebody that probably wanted to do those things at some point, but never had the balls, you know? And he's just mad. He's mad there's a guy like George Carlin out there that didn't give a fuck and went and did those things.
Oh, they resent his success. They resent the, devil may care attitude where he's like, I just didn't give a shit. If I want to do something, I just did it. Unless someone was going to fucking physically stop me, I'm going to do it.
Awesome. Because this dream blinded me. This dream was about America, about the path that we all follow, the middle of the road, middle class, America, mainstream, will dream. And meanwhile, I'm sitting there like this, fuck those people. Fuck that shit. Look at this stupid shit. No, I don't want to be in the bunny number. Can I get out of the bunny number, please? I don't want to put on that fucking uniform. And I didn't know this dissonance was inside me. And in the period this is happening, all through the 60s, the counterculture was forming. The free speech movement started in Berkeley. The hippies were growing into a force. And peace, love, power, flower power, pot smoking, anti-authority. See, ding, 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 anti-authority. Throw over the establishment. Burn down the math building? Wow. Ding, 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 ding. So I gravitated toward that because I was that person, really. And the people I hung around with were that way. The musicians I knew in the late 50s had gone through that transition. Suddenly they looked different, and their music changed. And I'm listening to people like the Buffalo Springfield. I'm listening to Bob Dylan. I'm listening to these people, and I realize these artists are using their talent to project their feelings and ideas, not just please people. And I began to take some acid and some mescaline. I didn't overdo it. I had a couple of trips that weren't the best, but I had a lot of great trips. And that is a values-changing drug. Hallucinogens are a value changer. So is marijuana. Like it or not, it changes your values. It opens up windows, doors of perception, Aldous Huxley called them. And you see things differently. And I suddenly was able to see my place and to realize I was in the wrong place. You see, in 1967, the summer of love, the peak of the hippie movement, I was 30. I was entertaining people in nightclubs who were 40. And they were at war with their kids who were 20. There was a generation war. I was in the middle of it. I was 30, 20, 40. And I said, what the fuck am I doing over here? These are the people that will at least understand me and give me a chance. So it took 2 years. I didn't go to the mountain and come back different. I didn't do a Bobby Darin. I didn't do a whatever, those people who just go away and they're back new suddenly. I took 2 years to change, and it happened on television. Happened on daytime television. Happened on syndicated shows like Della Reese, Virginia Graham, and Steve Allen had one of his many incarnations. He had so many great shows. This was one of his syndicated shows in Hollywood. And I went on there. Those shows had 5 shows a week. They needed people. I went on there. My beard was growing and growing, getting longer. My clothes were changing. My attitudes, the things I was allowing out of me were changing. And I talked about my changes on the panel a lot.
In fact, so much so that he put out an album themed around the changes, the AM and FM album from, once again, 1972. The really big year in George Carlin's career, 1972. Class Clown and AM and FM. AM and FM's it was like a concept album, which is strange for a comedian. But the AM side was all of his old material. His, maybe it's funny, maybe it's not, but it's, the clean material, the mainstream appeal material. And the FM side is all the new George Carlin, the raunchy George Carlin, the George Carlin that makes jokes about abortion and shit and whatever the fuck else. So he became really an explosive force in the 70s. It's kind of ironic that, at the time when he gave up on his dream of becoming this household name is really the moment that it happened for him. The moment when he stood out enough to actually garner that sort of attention. Like, whoa, who's this guy? And
it's funny how easy it is, because Carlin had a thing where he could talk, like, just listening to, I've never seen that interview before.
Right.
And listening to him talk about how he was living one way, and then obviously he had this other person that was closer to really what he was, that he had to come to terms with. Like, I kind of did that in 2015.
Right.
I left a life that was very straight-laced and very by the books and white picket fence and all of that stuff, and I was going out of my mind trying to be that. And, in our fan base, I've always gotten shit. People will post pictures of me now. I got long hair. I got a beard. I, dress. I have, like
that's true.
Like I want. And
you kind of look like Carlin here, only fatter.
Right.
Right.
And and they'll post pictures of me from 2011 or 2007 or some shit. And go like, man, fuck, what happened to Paul? And I'm so on the other end of that. Like, I wish I could show them how desperate I was in that position of, like, I'm trying to fit this mold that's expected of me, and it ain't working. I'm spilling out of the goddamn mold, literally and figuratively. My rolls are fucking flopping out of this thing. And how long can you, like, I went way longer than he did. He was way younger when he made this decision,
How can one look at the white guilt Paul
he was
picture?
30.
And I mean, take away the, like, whatever you didn't have a
take away the meme value.
Yeah, the meme value. Like, does that look like a happy person to you? Like, Paul, like, the life you were living and everything you described to me about that time in your life was that you were chronically unhappy. And I mean, look, I know you've dealt with depression. I'm not saying that goes away, but I think if anything that's helped your depression, it's probably just.
I feel more comfortable in my own skin than I ever have. You know what I mean? Like, I can say that much. It hasn't cured every ill that ails me. You know what I mean?
Not.
But
you're still you.
You know, and I'm not trying to say I'm George Carlin either. It's just relatable. I think a lot of people go through that kind of struggle.
Look, I mean, so many people. I mean, we live in a society where everyone is we're all placed into a mold like that, and some people are more than happy to conform to whatever shape society wants them to be, but there's also people out there who they don't fit. And George Carlin is a great example of someone who made not fitting the mold so central to who he is and his personality, and in doing so, he kind of reshaped what the mold was.
And obviously, like I said, when you look back on his childhood, it's like that's who I was. I'd been denying that in myself so long for this quest for fame that I realized that fuck, I don't care if I'm famous or not. I want to do comedy and talk about things that I want to talk about, not just what's going to please a bunch of people.
And the line that really stuck out to me in that interview was when he was, well, I'll have to paraphrase. I don't remember exactly what he said, but when he was talking about how he saw these other artists starting to use their talent to put themselves out there rather than just to please a crowd. You know, because what you saw there with that routine we watched from the Merv Griffin show is obviously that's crowd pleasing Carlin out there to tell some fucking Indian jokes, you know?
It's bland, boring shit.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like the joke itself is just something that comes from like kind of a weird, ugly, mainstream America place. Like, yeah, we sure
remember Westerns? Everyone knows a
Western.
Western.
Showed those fucking Indians what for, you know?
Right.
Push them back. Took their land, you know, and it's a very much like, I'm taking the side of the establishment, George Carlin. And he's like, you know what? That's not who I am. Fuck the establishment. They suck. I'm going to rep the underdog and the fuking scumfuck.
I'm taking a giant shit on the
outlaw.
establishment.
Now, Carlin, just like with Paul, didn't solve all Carlin's problems. In fact, in 1976, at the height of his popularity, Carlin pretty much vanished from the public eye. For 5 years, he barely appeared anywhere. He did very little stand-up. He did very little TV. Anyone want to take a guess as to why that was?
Alcohol or drug problem?
Yeah, drugs.
Yeah.
Okay. I love the cocaine. I love the cocaine.
So I'm going to read a little bit from a Playboy interview now. So Playboy asked, did you ever get into hallucinogens? Carlin said, I did LSD and peyote in the late 60s before I got into cocaine. That was concurrent with my change from a straight comic to the album and counterculture period, and those drugs served their purpose. They helped me open up. You know, if a drug has anything going for it at all, it should be self-limiting. It should tell you when you've had enough. Acid and peyote were that way for me. Cocaine was different. It kept saying, you haven't had enough. I became an abuser almost instantly. Playboy asked, specifically, what was your pattern of cocaine abuse? Carlin said, I'd go on runs 4 or 5 days without sleep. Then I'd crash and sleep for 18 hours a day for 7 to 10 days. Then it would take a few more weeks to get over a vague sort of depression. Then I'd be on another run. And Playboy asked, how did those runs start? He said, they began the moment I scored. I'd take a few hits at the guy's house, then I'd take a few more hits, then I'd put it away. But before I left his house, I'd take some more hits. Then I'd get in my car before backing out of the driveway. I'd open it up again and take a few more hits. Then while driving home, I'd somehow contrive to stop and go to the bathroom and take a few more hits. Later on, when it got really ridiculous, I used to snort in traffic.
Damn, so he was like the fucking total binge user.
Yes,
dude.
and they asked him if he was snorting while the car was moving, and he said, yeah. The moment I copped, I immediately wrote off that night's sleep because it was a foregone conclusion that I was not going to put half a gram away at midnight.
Oh, fuck.
I never took Reds or Quaaludes to balance out the Coke, so when it got to be 4 in the morning and the gram was 3/4 gone, I'd start wishing it was 9 o'clock and hoping the guy got up early. But of course, he didn't sleep either, so there was no sweat. During all those years, I was always looking forward to the next snort or the next guy I could score from. Playboy said, you mentioned the fact that Brenda, his wife at the time, was also a cocaine abuser. Did that mutual interest affect your relationship? He said, the effects of coke on our relationship was very sick. Now that it's over, those were actually funny times. Looking for each other's coke, hiding it, finding it, doing some, not telling the other, then fighting over it. Playboy was like, you stole coke from each other? And Carlin said, it was the typical paranoid experience. As soon as I knew my hiding place, I thought the whole world knew it. I'd write clues to my hiding place in code, then forget the code, and spend the rest of the day looking for my coke.
A comedy of errors, dude.
Playboy said, along with the paranoia, many cocaine users experience heightened compulsiveness. And Carlin said, oh yeah, sometimes when I was really loaded, I'd sit there on the floor and sort out every nut and bolt in the house. It was just sheer insanity. And often there'd be speed in the cut, so I was a speed freak too. There are an awful lot of things in the cut of street drugs that eventually make you sick. I reached a point where the skin around the edges of my fingernails used to hurt all the time, and it would peel away easily. Now that must have been from some poison in the cut. Perhaps not shockingly, it was during this time that George suffered the first of the 3 heart attacks that he had during his life.
You don't say.
The cocaine, I don't know if the cocaine caused the heart attack, but
likely if he was pretty young.
You know, it probably didn't help it.
If he was using that much, that could definitely have led to a heart attack.
Oh yeah, definitely exacerbated whatever existent heart problems he may have had. But he did have 3 heart attacks in his life, and it was heart problems that eventually killed him. Although not a heart attack, it was just heart failure. I don't know what the exact difference is between the two, but
well, a heart attack you can survive and recover from.
Right.
If you have enough heart attacks, then the muscle tissue that helps your basically your heart pump.
I believe he had 1 heart attack in the 70s, 1 heart attack in the 80s, and 1 heart attack in the early 90s.
He died of congestive heart failure,
and he ultimately succumbed to heart failure, which was what killed him in 2008, I believe. So anyway, but
basically his heart stopped working.
Even though we got to jump way into the future, we should probably talk about the other time when he struggled with drug addiction in his life, because cocaine was not his only mistress. And he was able to get off the cocaine on his own. He didn't need rehab for that. But in 2004, he actually did go into rehab when he became addicted to mixing wine and Vicodin.
Whoa.
At the time, he issued a statement and said, I'm going into rehab because I used too much wine and Vicodin. No one told me I needed this. I recognized the problem and took the step myself. And I wish I could say that were exactly true, but there was, in fact, an incident that immediately preceded his seeking this rehab treatment. And it's pretty funny. So George Carlin used to be a regular headliner in Las Vegas, but in 2004, his run at the MGM Grand was terminated after an altercation with his audience. So after a poorly received set filled with dark references to suicide bombings and beheadings, Carlin complained that he could not wait to get out of this fucking hotel and Las Vegas. He wanted to go back east, he said, where the real people are. He continued by saying, people who go to Las Vegas, you've got to question their fucking intellect to start with. I
love it.
Traveling hundreds and thousands of miles to essentially give your money to a large corporation is kind of fucking moronic. That's what I'm always getting here, is these fucking people with very limited intellects.
Hey, TJ, where are you going on vacation?
I'm going to go to Vegas. When an audience member shouted, "Stop degrading us," Carlin responded, "Thank you very much, whatever that was. I hope it was positive. If not, well, blow me." He was immediately fired, and soon thereafter, his representative announced that he would begin treatment for alcohol and painkiller prescription addiction of his own initiative.
Well, there you go.
So, I don't know if it was necessarily this, hey, I realize I have a problem of my own, no, there was an incident that, I was fired from my MGM thing for calling the audience stupid and them hating me.
Man, for telling the truth about the audience,
Yeah,
honestly.
really.
I mean, yeah, look, they can fire whoever they want. It's their own business. But, I mean, I felt like he was telling the truth.
He probably was, yeah.
But, I mean, being addicted to drugs is not good, so obviously he didn't need this.
So what other things did he do in his career? He was the first host of Saturday Night Live.
Ever? Wow.
Very first host of the
Back
very
when it
first
was good.
episode of Saturday Night Live. The only host ever in the show's history to not appear in a single sketch, by the way. He doesn't even... By the way, he claimed towards the end of his life not to even remember the SNL gig because he was so fucking coked out at the time.
You can tell.
He didn't, he didn't integrate it. The reason he wasn't integrated in the sketches was not because they didn't figure out that format yet or anything. It was because he didn't want to do it because he was, at that time, very insecure about his acting ability. Now, you'll remember earlier in his interview, he was talking about how his ultimate dream was to become an actor. And he did get a few early roles, and he did really poorly in them. So he kind of wrote off his own acting ability and said, "No, I'm not good at this. I just need to give up on it."
No, I've seen him in Jersey Girl. I've seen him in Dogma.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what the...
Well, he did eventually get over his fear of acting. And
but those were obviously later in his career.
I'm going to read from Wikipedia now, so all you Wikipedia the show people can make your snide remarks.
That should have been on the bingo thing, dude.
Yeah, Wikipedia the show.
Oh, fuck yeah, dude. Bill and Ted.
Yep. He obviously he appeared as Rufus, the time-traveling mentor of the title characters in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and he reprised that role in the sequel, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. I guess he was also did the voice of his character in the first season of the cartoon series. Maybe he was too expensive to keep paying. I don't know if there was multiple seasons. I don't even remember the cartoon. He also played Mr. Conductor on Thomas the fucking Tank Engine. Weirdly enough.
All right.
Which PBS's Shining Time Station. So whatever.
I remember him doing that. I remember seeing.
He narrated the show's sequences of the American version and of the UK version of the series. He replaced Ringo Starr in that role, actually.
Yep.
According to Britt Alcroft, who developed both shows, on the first day of the assignment, Carlin was nervous about recording his narration without an audience, so the producers put a stuffed teddy bear in the booth. So basically, he recorded it to the teddy bear. One thing that always that really strikes me about Carlin, having read his autobiography, or I think he called it a sort of biography or something along those lines, and just reading stuff like this, is that for a guy that was as accomplished as he was and thought of as being as fearless as he was, he did have a lot of insecurities about himself and his ability to perform certain things. There was a lot of self-doubt in George Carlin, and stories like that just kind of highlight it. He's been a comedian in the entertainment industry for years at this point, and he's nervous to record this narration for this show.
I mean, not everyone is like a Salvador Dali, where it's just like, I am an impeccable, it's perfect specimen, sublime human. I mean, I think a lot of people, even if they project that, they're confident. Like in George Carlin, I mean, I saw it more in his acting roles. Like when he was doing stand-up, he seems totally in control. But yeah, definitely with acting, he tended to kind of just like, even though he played a lot of times outlandish characters, I always did see him kind of a nervous energy in his roles. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Yeah.
In '91, he played the gay. He kind of did the gay best friend sort of thing in a movie called Prince of Tides.
I remember Prince of Tides.
Starring Nick Nolte and Barbara Streisand. I've never seen it.
It's been a long time since I've seen it.
So I don't know how he was in that, but it seemed worth mentioning.
I mean, Nick Nolte was still a thing.
Probably the biggest movie role I ever remember him having, though, was in Jersey Girl.
Yeah.
Which was a terrible movie, but I honestly thought George was really good in it.
Grandpa George, dude.
Yeah, he actually did a really good job in the movie. And he was in a bunch of Kevin Smith movies. He was in Dogma, as Scotty mentioned earlier. He had a cameo appearance in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back as the dick-sucking hitchhiker.
Oh, yeah.
He also, embarrassingly enough, had a show in 1993 called The George Carlin Show.
Ooh.
Do you remember that?
No.
Well, it's one of the few, it's kind of, it's not good.
Do you have any moments from it we can see?
Maybe I could find something.
Oh, dude, you can't fucking drop a bomb on us like that.
I didn't know it was a bomb. I thought probably you guys had seen it. Let's see.
No, I've never seen it.
I don't remember anything about it.
All right, so let me
But
see.
I'm probably not
like,
alone.
I was like 6 years old when this came out, so
Yeah, I would have been like 8 or something.
Not
9,
a good
10.
show. Here you go. I'll play a little bit here.
Is that Jerry Mulligan?
No, that was me. But I accept the compliment. Jack, give me a beer. Before your shift? Hey, relax, will you? I'm unemployed.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So you got fired again?
I quit. As a matter of fact, I've quit a lot more jobs than I ever got fired from. And they were better jobs, too. What's your...
And it never gets better.
Oh, man.
It's real awkward. It's
just
not good at all on any level.
This is just the antithesis of what you expect from George Carlin.
Yeah, it's almost...
I mean, a bland sitcom.
It's almost like a regression back to
it's like George,
previous incarnation.
It's almost like George never got over that dream. There's always a part of him that, like, there was still that, like, hopeful, like, and, I want to be this mainstream person.
When I read his biography, he actually said, like, okay, it was my kind of final stab at that, and afterwards I was like, okay, just set that aside. That's not what you should do. So he played a New York City taxi cab driver named George O'Grady, even though it's called the fucking George Carlin Show. Anyway, it was written and it was created and written by Simpsons co-creator Sam Simon. The only person I can remember George Carlin insulting in his book, by the way, or maybe it was someone else I'm thinking of, so I don't know if I should put that out there. But there was one person involved in that show that George Carlin actually had shit to talk about, which is unusual because he didn't talk shit about really anyone else in that book.
Right.
It ran 27 miserable episodes from December 1995 through to December 95 from its premiere in 93.
So one season.
Yeah, so I would have been 13 and through 15, so that probably wasn't watching a lot of TV at that time.
So in his final book, the posthumously published Last Words, Carlin said about the George Carlin Show, "I had a great time. I never laughed so much, so often, so hard as I did with the cast members, Alex Rocco, Chris Rich, Tony Stark." There was a very strange, very good sense of humor on the stage, but I was incredibly happy when the show was canceled. I was frustrated that it had taken me away from my true work. Carlin later explained that there were other, more pragmatic reasons for abandoning his acting career in favor of stand-up. In an interview for Esquire magazine in 2001, he said, "Because of my abuse of drugs, I neglected my business affairs and had large arrears with the IRS. And that took me 18 to 20 years to dig out of. I did it honorably, and I don't begrudge them. I don't hate paying taxes. I'm not angry at anyone because I was complicit in it. But I'll tell you what it did for me. It made me a better comedian because I had to stay on the road, and I couldn't pursue that movie career, which would have gone nowhere. And I became a really good comic and a really good writer." So you could thank the IRS to some extent.
Yeah, for harassing him for 20 years.
George Carlin's career.
That was kind of like Leonard Cohen, dude. He didn't make a lot of music towards the end of his life or tour very much. And then he was like, all your money's gone. Like, oh, shit.
Oops.
Better solve this problem.
Better do some touring. So I thought we'd take a look at we take a look at his discography and his HBO specials and stuff really quick before we wrap this up.
At the Playboy Club tonight.
Yeah, actually, we could probably just go to the Wiki article because it'll show a better list.
Wikipedia
the show.
But actually, now it is.
So you see here, Burns and Carlin was the first album, which we already kind of took a look at. 67 Takeoffs and Put-Ons. I don't know shit about that one. FM and AM. Huge album we already talked about. Class Clown we talked about. Occupation Fool. In 73, 74, 75, 77, 81, 84, 86, 88, 90, 92, 96, 99, 2001, 2006. Life is Worth Losing was the one me and Scotty saw, by the way.
Yeah,
it was the early incarnation of that one. 2008, It's Bad For You. That was the final one. And then the last one here in 2016, I don't know. I guess this was some kind of posthumously released album. I don't think I've heard it. I kind of like it when a lot of people die. Cool. Me too. And then there's some compilations there. But how many albums is that? I don't know. It's a shit ton.
It said 20.
20 albums. 20-something. Filmography, pretty short, but, some good stuff on there. Bill and Ted, obviously. The
Tarzan
Rufus role
2.
was pretty good.
Cars.
Tarzan 2, man. That was his finest moment, dude, when he appeared in Tarzan 2 as Zugor.
So, wait a minute. Look at this last one, 2020. Are they going to Princess Leia him into this movie?
So. It says posthumous release, archival footage.
But are they going to do the creepy fucking...
I hope not.
General...
What the fuck?
Whatever the fuck that they did. I mean, it looked cool because it was Star Wars and shit, but I don't know about in Bill and Ted. I don't know if I want to see... I don't know if it's quite to the level I want it to be.
Is he getting the Tarkin treatment, dude? Is he going to be...
I don't want to see Uncanny Valley Carlin, dude. I don't know.
It's coming, dude.
I'm not sure.
Cars? I'm surprised he did a voice for that one.
Fillmore from Cars. Yeah, it looks like he did a little bit of voice work throughout the 2000s. But yeah, there's actually some pretty decent stuff in there, but a lot of stuff I've never heard of. I've never heard of with 6 you get egg roll. That doesn't sound good.
I mean, Bill and Ted's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, so throughout the 80s and shit, not too much. I mean, like, he didn't really focus on the movie career, as we just learned, because he was...
With 6 you get egg roll?
Yeah,
dude,
with
I
6
want to
you get
see
egg
that
roll.
shit, dude.
He played Herbie Fleck in With 6 You
Dude,
Get Egg
I bet
Roll.
that's a fucking...
It's a masterpiece.
Masterpiece.
Yeah.
With 6 you get egg roll.
With 6 you get egg roll.
Wow.
Looks good. Looks real good.
Yeah, sure.
Bunch of television appearances.
What about HBO specials? I know you did a ton of those.
These are the HBO specials. Did his first one in 1977, the same year Star Wars came out. That's On Location, George Carlin at USC. George Carlin again, Carlin at Carnegie, Carlin on Campus. Probably his worst one, by the way. Playing With Your Head, What Am I Doing in New Jersey, Doing It Again, Jamming in New York, Back in Town, George Carlin, 4
I definitely
Years
remember
Comedy.
Jamming in New York.
You Are All Diseased, Complaints and Grievances, Life is Worth Losing.
Yeah, I've seen that one many times.
All My Stuff, I don't know what the hell that is. I guess it's a box
bad
set
for you.
of all of them, and It's Bad For You, the final one. I personally think that jamming in New York through It's Bad For You is the best part of Carlin's career for me. So really the latter half. But there's some good stuff in that. There was kind of a period in the early 80s where he wasn't quite on for me. But, still George Carlin.
I'm not real familiar with his earlier stuff. I mean, I watched him a lot in the 90s. And
he had some really good groundbreaking material in the 70s. Kind of towards the early 80s, it was a little weak.
I know you've owned some of these books, TJ. Brain Droppings.
I've owned all of these books. I've never even heard until today. Sometimes a little brain damage can help.
I've read Brain Droppings, Napalm and Silly. When Will Jesus Bring the Pork Chop?
I have all three of those, and I have An Orgy of George, which is the compilation of those three, and I have Last Words, which is his posthumously released
I'd like to read that
autobiography.
I've never read Last Words.
And you can listen to an abridged version, which is what I did. I listened to an abridged version of it, read by his brother, who pretty much has the same exact voice as him. You see here, this is kind of interesting, these internet hoaxes section. Apparently there have been a shit ton of people who have tried to get notice to their writings by attributing them to Carlin. And I actually remember reading some of these things in the past and being like, oh, George Carlin wrote this, George did not write a lot of the stuff that... it seems really especially popular back in the early 90s, mid 90s to put out these fake George Carlin things. And, George himself had to go on his website and issue a big correction and say, like, I didn't write this and I didn't write this and I personally think they're garbage and all this stuff. But I don't know. It's pretty weird that someone would try to do that. And now I guess it's probably gotten worse now that he's dead.
Yeah, people are really fighting over him now.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, I think a lot of the reason that you see a lot of these conservatives, like I know Tim Pool, I guess he doesn't like to be identified as conservative, so whatever, moderate liberal or whatever the fuck he wants to be.
Classical liberal.
A lot of these guys, they want to kind of claim Carlin for their own these days because he's dead and you can't say otherwise. But I think a lot of the reason for that is because Carlin was such an antagonist towards the establishment and such a voice for anti-censorship. Obviously, censorship is a huge issue that people on YouTube, I think, on the left and the right, have to deal with at this point.
I don't know that there'll ever come a point where people aren't dealing with it. It just seems like a natural inclination in a huge proportion of the species to be worried about what the other people are saying. It's probably ingrained in us from way the fuck back. And I really like seeing the writing on the wall and shit. Humanity, in my eyes, doesn't have many more years to figure this shit out. So it's a good chance we're just gonna not ever figure it out. But as long as I'm around, I'll stand on the side of people saying whatever the fuck they want.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, with Carlin, like I said, I tried to cover more of his career in this episode, not so much his life. And obviously, we could have gotten into a lot more specifics about the specific specials and the kind of material he did in them and all that. But those were pretty much the big benchmarks in Carlin's career. We didn't get too much into his personal life, although he actually did lead a pretty interesting life with a lot of strange events and happenings and things that we could talk about potentially. So this is yet another episode where I'm ending saying we could do a sequel to it. It seems like we never have actually done that. Maybe we need like a sequel month on this show where we just do nothing but
we go back and find all those.
You disappoint me, TJ.
Maybe one of our fans with Asperger's can
I just feel like
tell us all the times we've said that.
Yeah, I just feel like the show is so like momentum driven and so able to cover anything that going back and recovering something that we've already covered and taking another angle on it just doesn't seem necessary yet.
Yeah. You know what, TJ? I'll say this, dude. I felt like this was a good appetizer, but I wanted the full fucking meal, bitch.
Well, we'd be here for a while if we were to do
I would have been fine being here for 7 hours, just covering the
7
life
straight.
In time.
Well, Scotty would have done it.
You're free to sit.
I would have
here
left
and
at
do
3.5.
Hey, fair enough.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty good. Like I said, we've been filming all week to keep stuff coming out for you guys. I think
Stop whining, TJ.
I think we're all pretty tired.
No.
I'm tired.
Let's do another episode, dude.
Another episode. Scotty's raring to go. He wants to do more.
Do it, man. Just do it.
He's excited.
Just do it! Just do it!
He's excited for more stuff, but I'm good.
Make your dreams a reality, Paul. Just fucking...
And the reason we do that is to keep...
I'm gonna just do it and go lay in the pool for about a week.
All right.
Yeah, and you know, we've done a lot of stuff this week for patrons. We've done a lot of stuff this week for public consumption as well. And we thank all you guys. And we're gonna take a week off, although it won't be a week off for you. You'll still be getting stuff that we pre-recorded this week. But we're gonna take a little break. Come back recharged. Like I said, you guys won't miss a beat because you'll still have stuff coming out.
But we won't be here doing it.
But not us. We're taking a fucking break. So fuck you guys.
Yeah, fuck all of yous.
You're all idiots.
Fuck
You're all
yous
garbage.
all.
We hate you all, except for those of you who give us money, which I guess this is a patron episode. That's all of you. So you guys are
take
fine.
all that back then, TJ.
You guys are fine, but those plebs that don't pay for this
all those
shit,
other people, fuck
them.
them.
They're garbage.
Horrible
Absolute
people.
human trash.
And if you've since become a patron, then you made the right decision. And we're not talking about you. We're talking about past you that
You've
made the bad
upgraded
decisions.
from garbage to godhood.
There you go.
So yeah, George Carlin, obviously, pretty awesome motherfucker. I knew that before I did this.
The episode only cemented your belief in that.
I didn't really discover too much that I didn't already know. Probably one of the things that
I'd say the worst thing we saw in this episode was the George Carlin show.
That was a bad idea.
Yeah,
ill-conceived,
that
of
was
almost
stinky.
Reminiscent of those early appearances.
But the
that
good
he
thing
got
about
away
George
from.
Carlin too, I will say this, is that like when he was sucking, he recognized like, oh, that sucks, and he just changed it. It wasn't like he was like, I just gotta keep plugging away. The next George Carlin show, he's like, oh, I'm not really cut out for this.
I mean,
See ya.
I'm pretty sure if the George Carlin show had been a big hit, he'd still be doing the fucking George
But the thing
Carlin
is
show.
then it would have made sense though.
Right, that's true. Anyway, so thank you guys and have a good one.
See you
Peace
later.
The fuck out.
See you later.
Mm-hmm.